I'm here in Russell Street in Tralee for our lockdown video this morning, outside the Brogue Inn, the well-known bar, Kerry's Brogue Inn. I was hoping for a lockdown breakfast this morning, but no such luck. They're all undergoing renovations for the reopening on the 29th. Across the road, of course, where the purple sign is, years ago, the well-known bookmaker Tony Gallivan. Tony operated out of there for many years, and of course I remember also Bob O'Brien. Bob worked in Latchford's there, which the entrance across the road into the bakery yard of Latchford's back in the 40s, 50s and into the 60s. And Bob worked in Latchford's. He used to a bit of accountancy for Tony Gallivan, penciling they used to call it. Tony would call the bets to him and he'd write them down, record them. The Dish restaurant across the road was where the Vine restaurant was, and the Rose restaurant was after. And also in Tony Gallivan's, I think someone asked me about the Sayers family lately, and I asked well-known resident here in Rock Street, which is just around the corner from Russell Street, Archie Hubbard. Archie said that Sayers, as far as he can remember, Sayers ran a bar there where Tony Gallivan's was, the Sayers family. The Costello family from Ballymack's side run the pharmacy here now. They took over with the formal Mangan's pharmacy in Bridge Street, and they moved here in recent years. And of course, from the mention of Mangan's, we all remember Dan Daly, of course, and Mr. Mangan, who ran the shop in Bridge Street. There was also an entrance to the Kerryman newspaper, and that building here, that's where Costello's pharmacy was part of the Kerryman. It came out the side there, and the entrance to the workshop from this side of town was up the little laneway there at the side of Costello's. Of course, Wynn's pork and bacon shop was here. And Dan Shukru, that well-known electrician from Tralee, that lived in Tralee in the latter years, Dan ran a electrical shop and motor rewind business here till he retired. And that, of course, then was the back of Latchford's again. That's their storeroom. I remember years ago a fire here, and the exploding gas canisters were thrown up into the air. And at the other side of the street was Quilters' shop. Quilters, of course, their shop was there, and the yard was where these new buildings are now, and you could get china tea sets and statues and all kinds of religious paraphernalia inside in Quilters. What a wonderful shop it was. You could go in here and come out the back, you could get a gallon of paraffin or a pint of turpentine or whatever you needed for your job. Later on in time, Tom Stevenson had a car sales business here. He was himself and his mother, Agnes Stevenson. And of course, there was their secretary, faithful secretary for many years, Miss Williams. Miss Williams lived in Carolina Cottages in Strand Road. Faithful servant of Mrs. Stevenson's for many years, until they both retired. Of course, we then have two gentlemen who were the opposite ends of a coin. We had John Dowd, the barber, of course, John a rogue, or a rapscallion to use or a rascal, and across the road from him was Mick Brazel. Mick had a pub here for many years, and of course Mick was well known in military circles. Mick was a commandant in the local defence forces, the FCA at the time, which would be similar to the National Guard in America or the Territorial Army in England. Well respected. Mick, of course, ran a great bar here for many years, a great character. And the reason I mentioned both John Dowd and Mick Brazel in the same breath is that John was partial to taking a drink, and of course Mick Brazel's bar was quite convenient, being just across the street from the bar, and if you were unlucky enough to go in for a haircut and John Dowd was a bit thirsty, he could leave you in the middle of the operation, and you could be sitting in the chair for half an hour while he crossed the street to quench his thirst. John, of course, was legendary in the barbering business. There's the stories told about him will go down in the annals of barbering history in Tralee. There were many great barbers, but one day it said on a Monday that a local priest who was partial to a drop as well went in one morning, and they were both feeling the worst of wear after the weekend, and the priest sat down and John put the robe around him, his hands shaking from the effects of the overindulging in the weekend, and he began to shave the priest, and he put on the soap and the lather. He lathered him up, and the lather was inside his ear and down his shirt, and it was everywhere as well as his face. And he began to shave the priest, and the first touch of the razor he cut him, and he spit in a bit of paper and stuck it on to stop the bleeding, and he continued again and cut him again, and he continued this. He was about 10 minutes into the shave anyway, and the priest looked like somebody in casualty and emergency. And then in order to make conversation, the priest said to him, "John," he said, admonishing him, he said, "the drink makes the hand very unsteady." And John looked at him and he said, "And the skin tender, father." And of course this is still a barber shop 70 years later, and the people that own the barber shop now are no relation of John Dowd's, and I'm sure you could go in without being cut. On another occasion, a travelling salesman was in town, and he came out the back gate of Latchford's, and he was scooting along here, and he saw that the chair in the barber shop was empty, and he decided to go in for a haircut. And of course he made the fatal mistake of paying John in advance, of course giving him the entrance fee for Mick Brazel's pub across the road. When John was halfway through the haircut, of course he got thirsty, and he nipped across the road to Mick Brazel's and left the salesman sitting in the chair. So 5 minutes passed, 10 minutes passed, 15 minutes passed, and 20 minutes passed, and the salesman decided he'd go looking for John, knowing that he had tripped across the road to Brazel's bar. And he went over, still robed up for the haircut, and stuck his head into Brazel's, and he said, "Are you coming back?" he said. "I'm half cut." "Well, that makes two of us," said John, and kept on drinking. He eventually came back to finish the salesman haircut. Up from Quilters' shop was Scannell's butcher shop. The name that comes to mind here is Sonny Healy. I think Sonny could have worked for Scannell's for many years, driving the pony and car, delivering meat to all corners of the town. I can see the sawdust on the floor here, the old style butcher shop. Meat on the block. And great banter. At that time, of course, people didn't have the benefit of fridges. The nearest things to a fridge was a little wire safe on the back wall outside your back door in the shade to keep things cool and keep the flies away. The women of the town did their shopping every day. They shopped for their meat on a daily basis. Their issues, of course, that they started here in the 60s, and of course the Anchor Bar was next door to that, owned by the Barry family. Mrs. Barry of Racecourse Road owned the Anchor Bar. Mrs. Barry used to catering at race meetings as well, and a friend of mine, Donald Barrett, used to work here. He's a nephew of Mrs. Barry's, and he had the benefit of working here. And we also had the benefit of having free teas and buns at the race meetings through Donald's connection with Mrs. Barry. when we go to the races during the festival of Kerry at Ballybeggin and Tralee, Dolan would of course wangle his way in for free teas and buns, and we'd be with him. We're in Bridge Street now, just around the corner from Russell Street as you move towards the town centre, and we'd hear outside what was Hugh O'Donnell's bar and grocery. The name O'Donnell of course has a connection with myself. In actual fact, the John O'Donnell, who is a well-known retired now school teacher in Motherwell Secondary School for many years, was a son of Hugh O'Donnell's, and at his mother's funeral he told me that my father was the best man at Hugh O'Donnell's wedding when he married the sister of Paddy Kennedy, one of the great Kerry footballers from Ownascal. Paddy Kennedy of course was a member of the great football team of the 30s and into the 40s. He played in New York, of course, with the Kerry team at Yankee Stadium with the likes of the Landers and Bracker O'Regan. And he was the holder, Paddy Kennedy was the holder of 5 All-Ireland medals and 10 Munster Championship medals. No bad record at all. Hugh O'Donnell's grandmother, I think, came from Artfert, and for that very reason he had a great affinity with the people from the Artfert area and people from West Kerry. Of course, the O'Donnells came to Kerry after the Battle of Kinsale, and there's a great deal mentioned of Red Hugh O'Donnell now, whose body they're looking for in Spain. So we may have him return to his rightful place eventually. It was often known that Hugh O'Donnell gave the price of passage to America and Australia to the people who felt or were hard done by, especially people who suffered after the famine and into the 1900s. He would help them out, and more often than not, of course, when they made good on the other side, they would send him back the money, but that was never a question in his helping them out. As well as the son John, there was 4 girls in the family: Joan, Noreen, Bridget and Myra. And I have befriended Joan's son, Joe Vale, on Facebook, and he's filling me in on the family history, and I'd like to thank him for that at this time. He told me that his mother recalls putting labels on the Guinness bottles here at Hugh's premises, where you could buy anything from a tea set to a hundredweight of grain. The mention of putting labels on the Guinness bottles, of course, in the 50s, Guinness came into the bar in big iron or big timber casks. And of course the timber casks were made by coopers, and the Guinness would be delivered here with a big cork in the bottom of the Guinness barrel, and the barrel would be put up on stands, and a big mallet would be used to drive the cork into the bottle and force in the tap, from which then the Guinness was poured into bottles by the wholesalers mainly, and they would pass the bottles around then to other bars in the area. Hugh's father was also a member of... Here's Eddie Wall from Tralee Urban District Council out early in the morning. As I was saying, Hugh's father was a member of Kerry County Council and Tralee Urban District Council, and he was also on the Board of Governors for the workhouse, as far as I know, in Rathas. I think that was part of a councillor's duties at the time. And like a line from a Godfather movie, he was made an offer he couldn't refuse in the 1950s when the ASB came to town and opened an office here, and he retired with his wife and family to further down Bridge Street. We've dealt with latchers on a previous video, as we did Benners, but I think it's time to give Benners more room this morning. And of course, next to Benners Mr. Hennery ran Tyler's footwear shop, of course. Tyler's was the national franchise, they had shops nationwide. Mr. Hennery was the local manager here, of course, and in Tyler's here. And also Mr. Hennery would have been involved in the, Tom Hennery I think was his name, would have been involved in the local Chamber of Commerce and all things business in Tralee. And of course Benner's, the Mrs. Benner was here. I've gone into 3 generations of the Benner's family here now in this little shop. Small Benner's it's called, but it might be small in size, but it doesn't think small. Benner's is a well-known and popular shop for the last 70 years in Tralee. Kevin, of course, played with some of the great bands, the Troubadours and others, and Willie, of course, and there was another brother who came back from England and joined them in later years. His name evades me now. Kevin's son Adrian runs the business here now. I was talking to Brendan O'Brien lately. Brendan working with Kelleher's Electric in Ballymullen, and one of the O'Brien families from Strand Road. Brendan now living in Anna. Brendan was telling me that the fun they had here, because Brendan gives a hand from time to time, and the roguery, Kevin and Willie of course was quieter, but Kevin was outgoing, and someone would come in, or ladies would come in looking for hot water bottles for the bed prior to people having central heating and electric blankets, and Kevin would look at them seriously and say, is it a left hand bottle or a right hand bottle you want? Brendan was also telling me that he, in recent years, a friend of his came in here and got a part-time job, and a woman came in looking for tongs. Of course, a tongs is a thing for picking up coal. It's a little grab that you can pick up coal and put it into your fire. She came in, this old lady came in looking for a tongs for her fire, and of course the new apprentice inside the counter mistook what she was saying, and he thought she was looking for a tong, and he said, oh, I'm afraid ma'am you won't get it here, you'll have to go to Victoria's Secret or to Shaw's across the road. Poor old lady didn't know what to think of him. I'd often come out for my tea break in Latchford's for a bottle of lemonade there in Tehan's shop. Tehan's ran a little shop here. I'm not sure whether it was a bar or not. It was a lovely little shop. They would make sandwiches for your break if you wanted it. Across the road, Mrs. O'Sullivan from Basin View. Mrs. O'Sullivan ran a vegetable shop here with her latter years with her son there, who they then moved up the street and to a more central location where there now runs a shop and bar. And Mrs. O'Sullivan, she was one of the first florists in Tralee. When there was no such thing as a florist shop, she would make up a bouquet for you or something like that. The Madge O'Connor's was across the road, as was Joe Hussey. Joe ran a little sweet shop there, and she was very involved in the Rose of Tralee Festival of Kerry, as was Mrs. O'Sullivan in the early days. McQuinn's Butcher Stop, and the name is still over the door. The shop hasn't changed much in all that time. The McQuinn family are well-known butchers in the town, and especially the McQuinns of Rock Street, where Anya and Catherine and Sean McQuinn took over from that generation of Quinns, and they were famous for their black pudding and drisheen. Something I must say I've never indulged in. I suppose drisheen is a delicacy now. John Knightley's bar was next door, where now is the business of John Dowling's shoes. Of course, John captained the Kerry team to an All-Ireland final in the 50s. John Dolan started his business across the road here, where the O'Donnell family, Hugh O'Donnell, the aforementioned Hugh O'Donnell, retired with his family to this building here, and John Dolan was at that time renting the ground floor. And there is a picture in the Kennelly photographic archives that you could find online of a few children here and looking in the window in amazement at the All-Ireland Championship Cup, the Sam Maguire. It was displayed in the window here by John Dolan in the early days of the Dolan business. And 60 years later, the Dolan name is still associated with sports and shoes, and John's daughters run a successful business here at the corner of Bridge Street and Dominic Street. And the famous Val O'Shea's bar at the other side of Dominic Street, as they would say in America, the junction of Dominic Street and Bridge Street. And what can we say about Val O'Shea? Val was a well-known publican in the town of Tralee, 50s and 60s, and Val would often be called on to take part in juries for coroner's inquests, and he was well known in the street. And of course his wife Mary Val, a lovely lady, not long they'd moved to Strand Road in Tralee when they retired here. Of course Mary Val O'Shea was a lovely, generous woman. She was always looking after those who were less fortunate, and every evening when she'd close the bar, especially, and all times of the year, winter and summer, she would close the bar at 11 o'clock at closing time, and when she'd be tidying up inside after, well-known character of the town, Kylesy Moriarty. Kylesy was a great singer, of course, looked quite Italian with his sleek black hair, and he'd come to the window and he'd sing for her, and of course she'd give him out a pint out the window and he would sing, "You belong to my heart, now and forever, and our love had its start not long ago. You belong to me." His voice would ring out here and echo through the high buildings in Dominic Street. What a great character she was, and he was also. He lived in Strand Road for many years. The Coin bar now, it's the wine and spirits off license, and we remember fondly the Kennelly family when Tim Kennelly and his wife came here from Canada or America, and they bought this bar here. Stop 39 it was called, and the family settled in here to life in Ireland. The Maureen of that family, Maureen Kennelly, still remains in Tralee. She married the well-known bandsman Alfie Curtin of the great DJ Curtin family from St. John's Park, and Maureen is still around Tralee and always pleasant to meet. Years later the Kennelly family returned to Canada, but Maureen stayed on here. The Kennelly family became instantly liked when they came to Tralee, and of course the Tim and Mrs. Kennelly would be grandparents now to Laura Lee Curtin, who Maureen's daughter, and she's a wonderful singer as well and continues the family tradition of music. Of course, where the Dowling shop was now, there was John Knightley ran a bar. John was well known on the street, Knightley's bar, and of course there was other bars on the street as well as Val O'Shea's. There was Danny Lean's down here, and Johnny Wall, the former Lord Mayor of Tralee and councillor, John Wall, tells the story of his brother-in-law Harry McCarthy, and Harry had a dog, and I was speaking to Eddie earlier on and we couldn't remember the dog's name, but for the sake of the story we'll call him Spot. And Spot was always in the company of Harry when Harry was going for a drink. And one evening Harry came out anyway, and he went into the bar at one end of the street, Danny Lean's, and he had words with Danny when he went in, and he left the bar, and unusual for him, he was without Spot, and he came up the street anyway, and he went into John Knightley's, and he said to John, "Can I use your phone?" And John said, "For what?" Well, he said, "I want to ring Danny Leans," he said, "and tell them if Spot comes in, I'm up here." And Mick Noonan ran a rewind shop here as well in this street, and Jimmy Lavin, well known Jimmy Lavin, worked for the Kerry newspaper as a clerk or accountant, lived here, and this premises is associated with the Roger Casement story as well, something we'll cover at a later stage. And of course on the corner was Walsh's. Tim Walsh and Mrs. Walsh ran the Bridge Inn, now undergoing reconstruction. Well known bar in Tralee as well, very popular couple, the Walshes. And there were two pubs here, the which is now the Abbey Inn, and the one in the corner was the Hawk and the Holly, now closed. And the Abbey Inn, of course, Danny Lean and family ran the Abbey Inn from the early 60s until Danny retired lately. And it was a popular venue for all the great rock bands in the 60s and 70s. Came to Tralee first starting out. U2, Danny Lean brought U2 to Tralee, and local bands Kennelly used to play here, and they were nationally famous as well. And all the big rock bands played here for many years. Danny brought them. Before Danny, of course, was called Lucids, Babe Lucids, and it was known locally as Lourdes. And anybody that knows, Lourdes is a Christian shrine, and of course many people would go to Lourdes, the Lourdes Christian shrine, to pray for someone they knew, or to go and have a cure and bathe in the waters there, the curative waters of Lourdes. And this place here, the Abbey Inn, when Babe Lucid has it, was known locally as Lourdes, because people would come for a cure here when they'd be sick from drink, hence the name. And across the road in the place now where the Lavins, Jimmy Lavin lived, is Sean Oakes. Very, very popular entertainment establishment now. It is one of the more popular drinking establishments in Tralee, very popular with visitors to the town. On lockdown at the moment now, but I have been assured that they're also undergoing renovations after a fire in the premises recently, and will be opened shortly when the lockdown restrictions are lifted. And we'll finish today's lockdown video outside the premises known as New Yorkers. This, of course, was the home of Eamon A. Horn, the auctioneer, lived here. And New Yorkers now is a modern eating establishment run by the O'Shea family, and you'd often pass here at 7 o'clock in the morning, and the place would be watched. And Pa O'Shea keeps a great establishment here, and we'd like to send him our best as he has been ill lately, and he lives in Lower Cannon in Tralee, and we'd like to end this lockdown video today by sending him our best wishes from Bridge Street here in Tralee. I hope I've given you a little flavour of the street in my time.